certainly want to have some time for some meaningful interaction and conversations on this topic. So I don't know, Lauren, did you want everybody to introduce themselves? How do we want to handle that today?
Maybe since we're starting a little late and have a larger group, if you want to put your name and org in the chat, we'll do it that way, just so we have a recording. And then Marty, you can kind of kick us off.
Super, thank you. Well, we're really pleased that Duane's willing to do this opportunity for discussion and presentation on 2018 Seattle code. We, I think it was June or July of 2019, Duane, we first thought we were going to see this code enacted, and then we got pushed off to the fall, and now we're a little further down the road. So we will see this code enacted when, Duane?
February 1st.
February 1st. So it's becoming real for the third or fourth time, and has created some anxiety and need to make sure we're clear on what is in it. And I think Duane is doing a great job of really trying to better understand the implications of how these code changes really affect the on-the-ground development and design and practical reality. So without much further ado, I think I'd like to turn it over to Duane to walk us through what's coming and to carry us through some conversation. And if I need to facilitate that later on, I'm happy to do that. So.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm gonna let
Sandra,
our esteemed Sandra Mallory, do this just to get started here for us, and set the stage of what it is we're trying to do, and then we'll move into the geeky details with me.
all right. So yeah, I'm here just to provide a bit of context for the city's approach to addressing climate pollution in the building sector overall. Duane is with the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections. I am with the Office of Sustainability and Environment, but we've been working very closely on both this and other policies. So just want to start, I think, recognizing the current challenges with our health crisis, economic crisis, climate crisis, racial crisis. There's a lot going on right now. And so, you know, focusing on some specifics of energy code may seem outside of all of that, but you know, climate pollution from building emissions is actually the largest cause of premature death in the US now. It's just switched from transportation and electric generation. And then we also know certainly that low-income communities of color, those living in affordable housing, are disproportionately impacted by climate and environmental pollution. So we see all of our work on addressing climate as an environmental justice issue. And so, next slide, please. And then actually, let's, once you get to the next slide, jump right over that, because I've already talked about it, and go to the following one, slide 3. But I can start talking about it. We are the City of Seattle. We've been putting in a series of policies over the years to try and ensure we've got high-performing, energy-efficient buildings. And the discussion today, as you see, it's focused on commercial multifamily buildings. So we have very progressive energy codes. We have policies for our own municipal buildings for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and for energy efficiency. We have energy benchmarking. We have tune-ups in private buildings. And then, so, but all of that together has been fabulous and is not getting us where we need to go. And so if you're able to go to slide 4, Duane. But the bottom line, whether you can see the graph or not, is we are not on track by any stretch of the imagination to reducing our emissions to get to net zero carbon by 2050 and a 40% reduction by 2030. And this is just in the building sector. Transportation has obviously its own big issues.
Hey, Sandra,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but either I've got a bad connection or I'm not seeing any slide changes here. Are folks seeing slides?
I am not seeing them.
Remember, we did something.
I see slides, but I don't see them changing.
Yeah, that's what I have.
Right now, there should be one that says 39% in the middle of it. Do you have that?
No.
No, it's still showing that first title slide.
That's unfortunate. I've been doing a good job of advancing forward. Let's do the
So Duane, this is Lauren,
Yep.
What I think is happening is that you're sharing a different screen. So if you have two screens going, I think what you're doing is you're sharing one screen instead of the other.
All right. So now do you see the one with, well, let's see.
There.
Now keep going, switching
Okay.
through.
All right, that's not working. And we even got going early today to make sure that such a thing wouldn't happen. Let's try this
Yeah.
direction.
And I don't want to hold up well, you're going to have to get to your slides anyhow, Duane, but I don't want to hold up getting to the meat of this. So while Duane is figuring it out, just imagine there is a slide there with an arrow that's supposed to go from 2008 down to net zero carbon in 2050. And there's sort of a flat line of our building emissions, which is not going anywhere near that downward trend. The other thing to keep in mind is that in the city of Seattle, our emissions, there we go, okay, this is the one. So on the right-hand side, just note that in the city of Seattle, our emissions are primarily from burning fossil fuels. So, which primarily from natural gas because of our net zero carbon electric emission, or non-emissions, I should say. So let's go to the next slide, now that we can do slides. And the approach that the city is taking, and this is, again, we're talking commercial multifamily buildings. The first important aspect is to stop our emissions from growing. The top line on this graph is business as usual, starting in 2016. What Duane is going to show you related to the energy code will keep us from growing our emissions by about 17%. So the code is really important in terms of stopping the bleed, if you will. And then we need to address existing buildings as well. And so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the various triangles down below are Seattle performance standards and what would happen if in the city of Seattle we eliminated gas in existing buildings in these various sectors, larger buildings, 0 to 50 square feet. And then in between are the projections for what we're getting from building tune-ups in terms of emission reductions and the anticipated impact of the Washington Energy Performance Standards. And I put this up here to highlight that policies are coming to address existing buildings. And so whatever you build now is going to have to accommodate that change. And so it's really important to think about how these buildings are going to act in the future. And so basically then I'll turn it over to Duane to tell you how to build them now so that you're set and ready.
All right. So here we go. In case you haven't met me, my job description is to try to move the energy efficiency and carbon emissions of buildings in the right direction aggressively. This tends to make me rather unpopular, but I get to be the face of this. We have set these at the state level in Seattle, and as you saw from Sandra's slides, more aggressive policies may be coming soon. And so unlike most of the rest of the country where they're always haggling about whether we should do any of this or not, we're haggling about, okay, we're doing this, what's the smartest and most sensible way to get there? And so for this round of code changes for Seattle, had 4 basic principles we were working from, that everything should be sort of, that you'll see from now on, should be built off of these 4. The first one, which actually you people are really good at already, is to do a really good envelope, because those are building energy savings that are real and very long lasting. And nobody's gonna rebuild their building envelope as long as any of us on this call are alive, because we're doing a good job of it now, and it would be really uneconomical. So we got to build it very well. It's going to be there for a long time. The second one is we can't be putting in fossil fuel equipment now and expect to be carbon neutral in 10 years or in 30 years. That once you put in a system, you've probably noticed that even as the equipment gets replaced, the system stays the same for a long time. The third one is then, okay, if we stop putting gas appliances in buildings, we can't just do everything electric resistance, because we have a limited amount of that clean electricity, and we're going to start using it to transform all the existing gas heating and water heating to electric, to heat pump, and our transportation as well. So we've got a lot of demands on our clean hydro and whatever renewables we can get. And talking about renewables, that'd be number 4 as we start generating power. And you'll see later, that's the one thing that I specifically excluded affordable housing from, the thought being that we have to build the fabric of the building at a very high level. Like I say at the bottom of this slide, you got to make it so that you could reach our goals in 2050 without doing major surgery on the buildings we're putting up now. But solar is something you could do later. It's like almost the only thing you could do later without having to backtrack and rip stuff out. And of course, everything in there that we're doing has to be necessary for getting to this target, and it has to be as cost effective as we can get. See the last bullet point there? What we've discovered through many code cycles is that things that are expensive while they're still only being used for, LEED platinum projects or some other highfalutin thing, they're special order, one-off, high-risk things. Those cost more, but those costs come down once everybody's building to a different standard. We have lots of examples of that. And finally, as kind of a preliminary thing, we look to the big chunks of energy use. And for residential, obviously, space heating and water heating are the big chunks of energy use. And so we can do stuff with some of the smaller chunks, but we want to keep our attention where we can make the most gains. So now I'll rattle through some things. I've tried to identify in the slides where things are statewide that are changing you might want to be aware of, and where it's Seattle specific. But note that the air barrier test, which has been, the rule up till now has been, you got to do the test, you got to report the results, you don't actually have to pass. Well, now you got to pass. And we've lowered the test standard down to 0.25 leakage, but the you got to pass standard stays at 0.4. The people that have hired envelope consultants never have a problem passing this test, but some of the other people, especially further away from King County, have had a rough time of it. Also, we've changed how much glass can go onto things. Once again, this is not a big deal for affordable housing, where you tend to have very reasonable levels of glass, but man, in the private sector, especially high-rise people, it's a really big deal. Now, here's one where it's different. So we've changed the way that we're regulating glazing from our old system, which used to be metal versus non-metal. Now for all the punched openings, which is typically how affordable housing is built, not with curtain wall or other things, then you see it in red at the bottom there. 0.26 is going to be our new standards. That still allows for a number of products that are double glazed. We're not into triple glazed category yet. And then based on a phone call from somebody on this call here who said, we really like operable windows in affordable housing, but you can't really do the 0.26. We have a slightly more relaxed standard for your operable sections. By the way, having all this technical content to cover, I'm sort of rattling along like an auctioneer, but you can always stop me back up to explain something, because if you got a question, one of you has a question, probably everybody does. We have some rules in that I won't go in too much depth on, but now you've got to pay attention to anybody that's got cantilevered concrete balconies. That's just been a huge heat leak, and so we have some control over it now. And also a problem that's not typically an issue with affordable housing is just that your glass has to line up with your insulation, is essentially what that bottom, it's got to be lined up or close to, so that we don't have a big thermal leak around the perimeter there. Here's something that's just Seattle, and I brought this over from the New York City Code. PTACs, PTHPs have been used, for budget motels for a long time because they're real cheap, and to service them you can just yank out the entire unit and push in a new one. But at least now we're going to insist that people recognize that as opposed to the standard for a typical wall assembly, which is a U value of 0.05 something, this is 10 times that amount of heat loss, and you'll have to calculate that into your wall assembly U values if you're going to go for these things, because they're about 4 or 5 square feet. Yeah, about 5 square feet of this very, very poorly insulated thing and a lot of air leakage. And they make so much racket. Not sure if anybody has been using them, but we'll make those go away. Here's something that's happening at the state level, that the state is requiring this total system performance ratio, which is just a way of a backstop measure that ensures that the HVAC system you're using has about the same level of efficiency over an annual basis as what's been selected as a pretty good system for that building type. You see on the top right there that it's office, retail, library, etc. In Seattle, we've added multifamily, and this TSPR, and we could have a whole separate session on this if you like sometime, and I can actually get the authors of this in the virtual room with us. But there is free software available online at PNNL that they've developed for this, and they developed with funding from NEA and Seattle City Light, and I think OSC, didn't you contribute? That we got a module for multifamily as well. So we have a standard for efficiency of heating. Once again, this is probably not going to change any of your design. It probably will impact high-rise market rate housing a lot. So just be aware that this is there, and anybody who would like to fool around with this software, they've just completed and posted online the multifamily part of it, and I can just contact me directly, and I can get you that link. And they would love to have some of you run through this and give them feedback on anything they could do to make it more user-friendly. They're typically, as opposed to like an energy model for a medium-sized building that might take 5 days of some experts' work, this is more likely to take about 5 hours to do this sort of simplified model that ensures that your HVAC system is working okay. So please contact me if you'd like your design team to investigate how this impacts projects you have on the boards. So this is something that's not Seattle. It's Washington State, and you've probably all been hearing about it already. I just wanted to make sure that we got a slide up to recognize that just doing trickle vents and bathroom exhaust, you know, a lot of studies showed that it really wasn't ventilating dwelling units well at all, especially the upper floor units. They were often, the trickle vents were actually, it ended up being used to flow air out that had come in from the corridors. In this case, you got to deliver ventilation air to each space, and it's got to be a heat recovery from that air. So talking to various engineers in town here, you could use those little units like you see on that slide for each apartment. Some people are going to do that. You could have rooftop units with shafts down to each unit. You remember the quantity of air is not very large, so these are, you know, small shafts. But you know, with the vertical thing, you end up with some fire damper issues and having to have a shaft that takes up area that you'd like to use for your tenants. My favorite looks like it's going to be doing floor by floor units. Maybe at each end of the corridor, you can have a unit and some people like to run it right above the line of bathrooms rather than down the corridor and through those fire rated walls. But there are several ways to do that, and everything we're doing now should take into account that that's now required. So for Seattle, there are 3 big deals that I'm going to mention here, and this is big deal number 1. And it's just saying you gotta not use electric resistance or fossil fuel for space heating. So that means heat pump systems. And then I've got some exceptions, because it doesn't make sense to use a heat pump for a really, really low load. And so I start out with 250 watts and then went up to 500 watts per apartment, and then went to 500 watts per room, and then got nudged once again by another person on this call who said, you know, if you could go from 500 up to 600, I could do my corner units as well under that limit. I said, okay, 600, that sounds good. It may turn out that with larger units, especially like say the one that's on the top floor in the corner, you know, so it's got roof exposure and 2 exterior walls, that you need to go with a heat pump for that, but it would be a limited number of those apartments. The rules do allow that when it gets down to really cold temperature, and based on the type of system you're installing, it's either 40 degrees or 32 degrees, you can start having electric resistance heat kick in, but it's not the kind where it just suddenly switches over entirely to auxiliary, like a lot of the PTACs do, but instead it just phases the extra heat in as you need more of it. we don't get very many cold days, but we want to make sure everybody stays warm on those extremely cold days when they do happen. I'm giving a little pause here for everybody to be outraged. Okay, you can, we'll do outrage later if you like. Then getting into water heating, at the state level, the rule is you got to have a quarter of your water heating from renewable or recovered heat, or you can just use an efficient boiler system, or the state, because of federal preemption rules, can't just say everybody has to use efficient boiler, but we can make it an available option. So I think everybody would go with that outside of Seattle. Inside of Seattle, and this is big deal number 2, that central water heating systems starting at the beginning of 2022, so you got an extra year to kind of get ready for this, that ends up being heat pump system with substantial storage tank, because the heat pump doesn't run as it doesn't heat the water as quickly as gas or electric resistance boilers do. So it's a challenge for going forward, and various people have stepped up to say they're going to help. So NIA is planning on providing technical assistance and guidance there, and they have a whole high performance heating section that they've been working on, that they're going to get into these multifamily units, and City Light's probably going to be offering training and support as well. And so we have, from now, we got like 16 months until we got to be ready to at least have designs that are ready for that. And then, you know, a few years from now, as we start installing these systems, we'll have to have all the plumbers and installers up to snuff. So this is big deal number 2. And remember that pie chart at the very beginning. What are the big energy uses in multifamily? And yeah, there's space heating and water heating. So a little one probably doesn't affect affordable housing, because I don't think you're putting gas appliances in anywhere. And remember, this is all for things that are 4 stories and taller, but in Seattle proper, that's pretty much everything now. You would have to separately meter your gas, same as you do for hot water and for electricity for each unit. You have a separate gas meter. There are little ones that fit in a wall for 3/4 inch piping, but that could be used for billing purposes or not. It would be up to the organization that owned it. Light and power allowance is not an issue for dwelling units, because they have their own separate rule. But for all those other spaces you have in your building, at the state level, lighting levels have come down 11%, and Seattle's, and that brings it down to just about exactly where Seattle's current lighting power allowance is, and then Seattle's going 10% lower than that. There's talking with our electrical people that do plan review, this is never a problem. It's just really easy to meet these targets, but we want to make sure that the targets are something like realistic. So here's, I somehow lost my slide. Let's look at C406. This is the section that says that a building has to have a few above code measures built into it, and at the state level, you have to get 6 points on this scorecard, and in Seattle you'll have to get 8. I had initially proposed 10, but I kind of got talked back off that ledge, and so we've done a couple changes to that Seattle, since Seattle required, if you look at the top one that I've got marked in yellow there, since Seattle required DOAS for multifamily, we said, well, we wouldn't obviously be giving credits for that. But after some haggling at earlier public meetings this past winter, we decided, okay, we can still give half credit for that. It's kind of a double dipping thing, but it looked reasonable. Then you see the others at the bottom. Remember, we have just a slide a minute ago that said, oh, you got to use high efficiency water heating. So that's already in the code baseline. So that number 8 goes away in 2022 as an option. But the number 9, which is the high performance one, and that essentially means you use a low global warming potential refrigerant, like the CO2 systems that are in a few affordable housing projects in Seattle now for water heating. Those still get a substantial number of credits. So you can get 5 credits for those, and that's a big chunk of your total you need. Here's an engineer looked at the state code. This is a friend of mine from FSI Engineers, and sort of marked out which of the options made the most economic sense in his view for the different building types. So you see the 2 columns that I have circled in red there. That's your R2 multifamily. The squares that are filled in with green are the ones that he felt were a slam dunk, that you got a lot for your money. And the ones filled in with red are sort of a second best. They also penciled out, but just not as well as the ones in green. Then there are a few that he did not put any color on that he said, no, that'd be really expensive. So somebody's taking a look at your mileage may vary, and you notice on the chart on the right that 8 credit thing, that's the one that's become 5 credits in the new table. So just taking a shot at it, based on those ratings of his, say, okay, you take the lighting one, that's almost a gimme, and you take the advanced water heater, and that gets you all the way up to 6 credits. So to get to Seattle's 8 credits, I said, okay, we do the reduced air leakage, but you might pick one of those other items in the second best column. Notice the one that's got the rooftop solar is 3 credits maximum, but you can get that one credit at a time. So you could just do 2 credits that way. So I'm going to just talk about energy modeling for a bit, and I'm not sure. Maybe somebody on the call could unmute for just a second and tell me, how common is it for affordable housing projects to do energy models for their projects? Can somebody fill me in there? Maybe not.
David, do you want to weigh in on this?
I've not been involved in one, but we're starting to look at it more to provide more design flexibility. I don't know. I haven't looked at it under the 2018 code at all.
Okay.
Teal, so much better from.
So I've got this option. Yes, we typically see energy modeling used for all the high-rise projects in town and for complicated buildings like labs and hospitals. But more basic buildings don't use it. But we'll run through this anyway, because it's probably at least important for you to understand that we've entirely thrown out the energy modeling pathway that we've used for all these years and replaced it with a new one from ASHRAE that's got the poetic title of Appendix G. And we've switched from measuring the energy used on the site to measuring the carbon emissions. And so what you see there is at the state code, if you look at the row of numbers on the bottom, that's actually the percentage of a baseline that was, for odd reasons, tagged to the 2004 version of ASHRAE 90.1. So if you look on the left there where the multifamily is, you can use 56% as, you can have 56% as much emissions as you would have under that old code. Now, in Seattle, because of all these other things I've just told you, we have a more stringent code. So to make the Seattle energy modeling match the prescriptive path stringency, that we just took 10% off of each one of those. It's not exact, but it's pretty close to the difference overall. And so at multifamily, instead of 56% as much energy as in that old ASHRAE, or is 56% as much carbon emissions, you could use 50. And then we also have this target performance path, which I don't think any of you has used ever, but there's another option that if you want to have your building evaluated by how much energy it really uses and be willing to put some money there to guarantee that, you can have 12% higher than Seattle would normally allow. So people have often asked about the baseline for glazing, and for multifamily in energy modeling, if you look at that part that I've highlighted down below, you can have up to 40% glazing. I think the multifamily units that I've seen, your percentage of glazing has been like 20 or so percent of your wall, which is interesting because you typically have pretty nice daylighting in those units, but just not using really big things. So this is big deal number 3 for anybody who uses energy modeling. Since energy modeling has typically been used to degrade the building envelope, I've been saying now that no, in this proposed new Seattle code, you can't make the building envelope any worse than the prescriptive code allows by doing energy modeling. You gotta at least keep that, because remember at the very top of this presentation, that was idea number 1, is that we gotta build envelopes that are gonna stand the test of time and get us where we need to be in 2050. Renewable energy. There's a larger requirement now for buildings, including multifamily, to do it, but this is the one thing that in the code I've exempted affordable housing units, affordable housing projects from the renewables. And for those people in market rate housing or other commercial buildings that are required to do this renewable energy, I've set up some options that they can donate, they can gift a system over to an affordable housing project in Seattle or to one of the state agencies that has a solar program set up, and thus get out of having to do it or part of it on their own roof. So you might have somebody calling you up and saying, hey, do you want a free PV system on your roof? And I think the answer is yes, we want the free PV system. The way I've set it up in the rule for that gifting is that it would have to be complete and functioning on the site that they sent it to in order to get this credit. And that's how big is this? If a building is 20 stories tall, you look at the bottom of that chart, that would be about 1/3 of their roof area would be covered with solar, and so that's perhaps a big chunk of solar that somebody might be coming your way to offer to you. So that's it. I know that a lot of this sounds challenging, but I wanted to end by just saying that we have buildings up around town that already meet these requirements and exceed them. They're doing better than that have, I don't know, for reasons of their own at market rate and in affordable housing have gone beyond. And you in the exemplary buildings program are familiar with this fact that yes, it is possible already, and we can get there, and you'll be leading the way for a lot of other people that are looking to you, because you and the Exemplary Buildings program have already solved a lot of these problems. You've looked at envelope. I know we're going to be looking at water heating coming up, and you've looked at mechanical systems. And so if anybody's on top of it, it's probably the people on this call. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marty. You want to be the MC here?
Thank you, Duane. Great presentation. I think pretty decent clarity on the things that you're doing to make people further dislike you. So it seems obvious what folks might want to hone in on. So with that, let's make sure that if there's something that needs clarity or whatever, that you share that as a question with Duane and the group, and let's take it from there for a little while. Or if you want to provide him with just a little touch of affirmation, the affirmation vending machines in Seattle have been shut down due to COVID, so maybe he could use a little pep talk. So let's open it up and see if anybody's got some thoughts.
We also just take complaint and whining, you know.
I've got a question. This is Robert Drucker from Environmental Works, and Duane will not be at all surprised to hear this coming from me, but could you talk about the intersection of this new code with older buildings undergoing renovation and or historic buildings undergoing renovation?
Sure. Yes,
particularly challenging.
Yeah, that's up your alley. That your Environmental Works up that particular alley a lot, right? Yeah, there's a few things to know. One is for historic buildings, when the Landmarks board says don't touch those windows, we don't touch those windows, right? That becomes the baseline building. We'll make up additional energy efficiency on our non-historic buildings, but it's really important to the city to preserve that fabric. So we don't mess with anything that Landmark says that's off limits, and we'll make arrangements for that to get factored in. For what everybody's favorite phrase is substantial alterations, right? Where the powers that be at the building department have said, this is substantially extending the physical or economic life of this building. It's usually one of those complete gut and remodel projects, you know, where you've booted out the tenants and redone everything and it's all spiffy and new. And in those cases, you're required to bring the building most of the way up to current standards. And we are holding the line on that mostly. And in a few situations, and I was actually in a negotiation on one of those just this morning, people have been able to demonstrate that there just ain't no way. And that's a pretty high bar for us. And we know everybody's tricks, but sometimes, given some historic facade and a historic roof and limited floor to ceiling space and a whole bunch of other things, they can't do everything, in which case we back off a little bit. We do the same thing actually with seismic, you know, that sometimes we're supposed to bring things and substantial alterations up to new code, and well, some buildings it's not going to happen, but we can make it better and get closer to that level. So the other thing to consider is if you're replacing your heating system. So this is one of those projects that happens every 30 years or 40 years or something like that, where you know, it's really old and mangled, and so they're actually going to replace that system. At that point, you typically have to bring that system up to this current code. And yeah, if if you're functioning off of gas heat now, it might mean you have to upgrade your electrical service. There are other things in there, and we'll still negotiate somewhat, but we expect, our hope is that affordable housing stays affordable in the long run. We're not just talking about first cost of construction, but we're talking about that those utility bills stay low long into the future.
Okay.
Other questions?
It's a little bit better.
What's better?
The code's better? That might have been an out of field
Maybe
bleep.
that wasn't the comment we supposed to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else that somebody wants to bring up? Surely there's a question or two, or you've all studied this so much. The SMR architect team is on board here with us. Anybody from SMR have a concern or a thought they want to share?
Marty, this is Rumi Takahashi. Can you hear me?
We certainly can, Rumi.
Oh, I'm sorry about the echo. So my question actually would be having to do with climate change and the warming temperatures that we are seeing in our region, and wondering how.
It's going to cool up, Rumi. It's going to cool down real soon.
Yeah, that's what we hear. You know, we do want operable windows in our units for ventilation purposes, and wondering if warming and cooling of units, if the warming climate and potentially increased cooling demand in units is something that we really ought to be thinking about more kind of holistically as far as leakage goes and performance of windows. I mean, we do still have winters here for the time being, but it does seem like there's increasingly going to have to be a balance between the cooling season and the heating season. And some of the measures seem like they're really trying to protect us from the heating season and not really acknowledging the cooling requirements that we are going to have.
Yeah, no, it's a really good cluster of questions. And I should say that I was on a vacation in Portugal a couple of years ago, and got to spend some time with my counterparts in the Lisbon building department, and they were kind of making fun of us for saying, you guys are all about heat pumps, but we don't. And they have, you know, Lisbon, it gets really hot and sticky. It's not that nice by Seattle standards in midsummer, but they're dealing with it not with heat pumps, but with just really good passive design. They're being careful to keep sun off of windows in the noon and afternoon hours, and they're using a lot of thermal mass in the buildings to absorb heat. And they say that their newer affordable housing, what they call social housing, is more comfortable than their older stuff. They really learned it. So we might start looking in that direction. And one thing about the heat pump thing is that especially for those exposed units that maybe have, you know, corners that where you're going to get sun from a couple angles, that you can then use that for cooling in the summer when it gets too hot. But I'd sure like to see designs that look at protecting, because cooling is usually about keeping direct sun out of your building. That's the job number one. So we can look at that. Exterior shading, exterior operable shading might be the smart way to go. As far as heating, the expectation is not that, it is, yes, that we have warmer winters typically, but also that there's greater variability, and we could still have extreme cold, as the Northeast has experienced a few times in the last several years due to shifting weather patterns. So we have to be prepared for that. And the final thing I'll say about this is that heating and water heating are where we're doing the combustion in buildings, the great majority of our fossil fuel combustion. And so that's the reason there's a focus there is that we're not doing combustion typically for our cooling systems. We're doing it for heating and water heating, and we got to stop doing that right now.
David, I might ask you to weigh in here briefly with Duane's great thoughts. How far off are we on the exemplary building specs and standards, do you think, in helping move us in the direction Rumi's alerting us to here?
Well, certainly the exemplary building specifications don't necessarily point you towards using, say, heat pumps for heating and cooling, but certainly with respect to the new code, the exemplary building standards would comply with it with some margin still, is my opinion. But certainly, yeah, the passive features, emphasizing that, and there's considerations that go along with adding active heating and cooling outside of using electric resistance, and that's maintaining those units, the refrigerant associated with those units, which can have sometimes more detriment than the energy they save. And so, I think it's a real important conversation to on making that leap to those more advanced systems on the trade-offs.
Rumi, are you satisfied with their responses, or do you want to probe this further?
I'll just insert grumble here. I'm good.
Okay.
I am trying to find some decent future weather predictions under different climate models. It's the the resolutions aren't great at our level. Like the Puget Sound has some very special characteristics, but the University of Washington actually has been doing a bunch of work in this area, and I'll try and get an update on if we can have any better predictions, and of course predictions that might inform some of these decisions.
I'll just put in one last comment here because I can't resist. It just feels a little punitive in the way that glass and glazing and transparency and operability are treated in the code. Whether that's intended or not, it does feel like it a little bit that you get punished for trying to create more ventilation and more natural light. And that's, partly because of the Windows performance. But if truly combustion is the concern and the emphasis, then I'm wondering if the envelope, the high focus on the envelope performance is maybe misplaced or a little bit misplaced, or the emphasis is a little too high there.
I can actually respond to that. The only time we see people not, anybody needing more than 30% glazing ever is high-rise multifamily and high-rise office. Those really want to have like 60% glass or something like that. I guess it just leases spaces better. And people like that spectacular nature. But I've never heard of an affordable housing project, or really any medium or low-rise market rate housing that had any problem with these glazing limits. It's really about high-rise construction. I don't think you'll see any constraint on the designs that the design teams are coming in with these rules. I wanted to mention a couple things about the heat pump world, and one is that there are these stand-in units that are installed in a couple of projects in Seattle that use CO2 refrigerant, and they've promised that this year, right, sometime this fall, they have an 8-ton version of that coming out, and so there's a good way to already start dealing with the refrigerant issue, which is, as David mentions, is a big deal, and the next big deal we really have to tackle code-wise. And another thing that's just kind of on the cusp is this double duct system, which unlike the PTACs and so forth, just has I think it's a 4 or 5 inch hole in and out through the wall, and is able to bring in cold air and pump heat out of it and expel even colder air. And those are not on the market today, but they're promising once again that I think they're getting federal approvals, and those are starting to be available by the end of this year, at least. That's what I've been hearing. So there are a couple things on the horizon for us, or very near here, that will make the double duct system look really economical compared to all the other heat pump options I've been examining.
Okay, this is moving along. Others, things you want to bring up? What? How about this little game of not requiring, you know, the affordable housing to do the renewables, but letting the market rate people off the hook by giving it to the affordable? How do you think that idea is going to pan out?
I don't know how many people are going to want to give it away, but in fact, I don't even know how many of the affordable housing projects are going to be interested in accepting it. I heard from somebody that due to the kind of strange legal structure and financial structure of some affordable housing, that accepting that gift might mess up their status or something. So we'll have to see. But I did set it up so that if somebody is gifting a system to your project, and it's a new construction project, it would only have to have it be 3/4 of the size of the one that on the market rate project. And if it was to an existing building rooftop, it would only have to be half the size of the required one. And that's just to recognize that you know, putting a system on an existing roof is less economical. You have to hire a lift and, you know, mess with the roof warranty and all that.
Any thoughts or reactions to that? I guess Sandra and Duane, and while people are thinking about what they're going to say, at a much more strategic, higher level, how do we move away from sort of this code-based strategy to one that looks at every potential building and how to maximize its renewable capacity?
I'm not actually that worried about the renewable thing, and I'm not. I think it's great to take advantage of having a big unused roof and use it for productive purposes, and I see it more as being part of a community responsibility. There are going to be lots of buildings that use way more energy than they can possibly produce on their own rooftop, and there are going to be other building types that use way less. I'd love to see a system where people can use their rooftop or their parking lot for that energy generation and get paid for that energy and have it shoot over to the taller and more complicated buildings we have that need more than they can produce on their own. Have a big community-wide balance going there. But that would require, I think, changes in the law that governs how utilities run. Also, one other thing about solar, it's the only thing that gets cheaper year over year, right? Well, that and high efficiency lighting. Everything else is getting more and more expensive as we go along. But solar gets better and cheaper every year. I think the cost per watt goes down about 5%. So it's the only thing that makes some kind of sense to delay, as long as you set up your roof so that it's going to be really easy to add it in the future.
The only thing I'm hearing is there's been a bit of a concern about the current siting of mechanicals on the roof, and if we don't anticipate, you know, the solar or the moving of the relocation of mechanicals on the roof could become a problem. So it's something to bear in mind in the solar ready realm.
Yeah, in the solar readiness rule says that 40% of your net roof, so you take your gross roof area and subtract all the skylights and roof decks and planted areas and whatever else you have up there in mechanical equipment, that 40% has got to be ready. But I would say, why not make all of the clear space on your rooftops be ready? I've noticed that most affordable housing projects do not use their rooftops actively. And so they have a really good expanse of roof there. And it's gotten to the point where it's at least marginally cost effective for you, especially if somebody gives it to you for free.
So Duane, I'm noticing that unlike my normal pattern of monologue, we're doing a bit of a dialogue, but we don't have a lot of other people carrying on with us here. So I do see that Becky Bignell is on the call today with us, and I'm sure that she's needing to know more about what this means for her work out there doing business development for Walsh. So why don't we see if Becky wants to ask a question or make a comment while Sharon Libby thinks about what she might add to the conversation.
And
no pressure.
Marty, I wonder if I could just pipe in too. I think we, you know, the city are also interested in hearing from folks who have done projects that specifically are, you know, either all electric or, you know, especially the hot water has been electric heat pumps and how that's gone and why it was done. And then, you know, getting some feedback too on some of the challenges you might foresee so that we're well versed in what they might be.
Thank you.
Hey, this is since I was called out, I figure I might speak up a little.
Yes.
Yeah, just kind of more of just a conversation point, not really anything here nor there, but since the code implementation date had gotten pushed back, we actually saw quite a few project teams and owners just kind of rushed to try to get in prior to that so that they were under the old code, which was personally just a little little disappointing, but of course I understand the economic implications of all of it, and with affordable housing, that's obviously the forefront of everyone's minds. We are starting to see, we've got at least one project looking at going ahead, even though they don't need to, but going ahead and looking at the 2018 code because that may look at them more favorably in funding situations. So we are excited to start seeing those projects so that we can start compiling some of that information and looking towards our design teams and owner teams to work out which options are going to, you know, be best on their projects. And hopefully we can come up with a graph that is kind of like what Duane had put together in his presentation. I think you said FSI did that chart where it shows like which options in the C406 might be most affordable to and most reasonable to put in, you know, the type of projects that we do anyways. So that'll be interesting. And we don't have very many projects that are using hot water heat pumps yet, and we're also looking forward to compiling some information from that. I think we had a project, Bellevue College, that used a hot water heat pump heating, and they've actually been having some issues with it. So we're trying to kind of compile that, what that was and what the information was, so that we can share that knowledge factually, and not, of course, like, oh no, this is a new technology. But we want to be able to share it reasonably and factually back to all of you. So just looking for more data, I guess.
Cool.
Darren,
actually,
follow up and ask, you've mentioned that you may get more favorable review from the funding as not being immersed in that complex funding world. Can you clarify a little bit what specifically is working in your favor?
Becky, is that something that you can speak a little bit more specifically about?
Thanks for putting me on the spot, everyone.
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Marty and Sharon. No, I'm kidding. So I don't know, maybe one of the developers on the call might be able to articulate this better, but there are incentives in the workforce housing tax credit program. So the 4% tax credits that get paired with bonds, which have become highly competitive in the past couple of years. And they have it's funny, I actually this week was hoping to get my ducks in a row on what those choices were. But basically there is a section of scoring on energy efficient buildings. And you get 3 points, maybe Bill Singer might even know this. You get 3 points if you're choosing some C406 choices. So I'm not quite sure how many points. And then you get 6 points if you're going above that. So maybe that's something I'm fuzzy on what the credits are for those 3 and 6 points. So we're, I think, seeing at least a couple owners who are wanting to go grab that 6 point option. And so those owners, I believe, are choosing the ERVs.
Yeah, we have, this is Bill Singer. We have 2 projects that are going after that additional bond scoring, and that's pushing us to do 2 extra C406 credits. So even though we're staying under the existing energy code, we're still going to be doing the heat pump, hot water, and the ERVs to meet that additional bond scoring. So, and we're also looking at what the implication of that for projects that can't get in right now under the existing code, what that will mean for, the 2018 code. How do we get those additional points with the new C406 credit scoring? So that's where we're having a challenge right now, is for projects that aren't quite far enough in to be able to make it in before February 1st.
Thank you.
And to your point, Bill, is we won't quite know what the menu looks like, say for a project that might be applying next June.
Correct. If they can't make it in for the first, within the 2015 code.
Yeah, and I think that's where, the whole universe of folks working on these projects, whether you're a developer, a contractor, designer, or operator, is that we have code changes and we have climate goals, and then which each owner kind of takes their own stance on. And then, every owner is trying to compete for resources, and the criteria and the support for high performance building really changes probably feels like every 6 months with different funding groups. So we've got the Washington State Housing Trust Fund, we've got the tax credit program, and we've got local funders like the city of Seattle or King County, and they all, it feels like, have a little bit of a slightly different stance. And so I feel like there's an opportunity to get a little more cohesiveness there, not trying to pit that first cost versus long-term benefit.
Walsh is taking that on.
That's why we joined HDC, Marty.
Um,
But yes, we are doing our part. We're, you know, we hope to be gathering data and understanding, helping owners and helping HDC understand some of those cost benefit calcs and getting those conversations moved forward in projects, you know, moved earlier in projects, I should say.
Can I make a quick request that to Duane, if you could please pull the presentation back to the slide on space heating. I kind of missed half of the information on that as we were running through, and it would be nice to review while we're having this conversation. Thank you.
I'm glad Aaron caught that. So he kind of slid that slide through fairly subtly.
So just to recap, the deal is that the fundamental space heating system cannot be electric resistance or gas, but there's the exception for 600 watts per room. Talking with several different affordable housing providers now, 600 watts per room works great for most rooms. And then there's some question, I've heard works great for a corner unit or can't possibly work for a corner unit from different people who are both really good. So I think that careful attention to air leakage might be one of the clues that lets you get under that limit. If it is indeed over that limit, like we mentioned about the upcoming potential higher temperatures in Seattle in the summer, that having those more exposed units have some cooling capacity might actually be something you want to do anyway, which you get with most heat pump systems.
This is Julie Banerjee from Seattle City Light. Does that seem like an option that people would be interested in taking, or is the cost still too prohibitive to do that?
The cost for the heat pump? Yeah, it looks like there's a cost differential of several $1,000s per apartment unit. So I think people will, since this whole work style is about keeping your initial costs down, I think people will use those 500 and 600 watt cove heaters extensively, and then it will definitely add money to do the heat pump in the where you can't make it with the 600 watts per room. Did that answer your question, Julie, or were you asking a different question?
No, that answers my question. I'm wondering if other folks on the call agree.
Yeah, I would think our clients will be pushing us to avoid heat pumps for heating, just to save costs and the space required for those, because cove heating is easy, it's cheap, and it works well.
Yeah, I've seen it work really well in some buildings. Is there a role that you would see that the electric utility could help, either through incentives or otherwise, for space heating, or something else that you've heard today?
I'm really interested in battery storage and how that can lower the tenant utility costs moving forward if we're going to have these large PV arrays on all of our buildings, and if they're going to be gifted to some of our clients from market rate. How do we actually keep that energy on site, or, you know, so that it's actually providing a benefit to our tenants instead of just to City Light?
I could take a stab at that, or at least a beginning stab at that. And that's that typically your projects are 5, 6, 7 stories now, right? We don't really have much of any low rise in Seattle proper anymore because land costs are so high. So I think that even on a Sunday morning when most people are still sleeping, and you had a large array, say that covered 50% of your roof area, I don't think you'd be exporting any of that energy. I think you could use it all immediately as it comes in. It would be a worthwhile calculation, but that's my hunch. Not much has to go.
It depends.
And
It depends.
Julie's grid, works nicely as an energy storage system for us, right?
Depending on where. Yeah. And the exemplary buildings program, the buildings going through that actually are trials of doing a virtual net metering, where tenants will receive benefit on their bill from a solar array. So we're definitely trying it to see how to make that work, because we recognize the value of it. It doesn't make sense for smaller arrays, but yeah, that's really helpful feedback.
Thank you.
This is David. Regarding the threshold on the dwelling unit electric heat. So based on what I've seen is that likely with kind of exemplary building envelope requirement, following those guidelines, there's still a good chance that the corner top units might exceed this threshold, even with low air leakage and good envelope. So I'm interested to hear from, architects and developers, I guess, primarily, is if only there's a heat pump only in the corner top floor unit, does that present any kind of equity considerations that might raise a red flag with these developments?
I mean, because one unit will have cooling and nobody else gets it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, in our market rate projects, they typically do it by floor for those reasons. They don't want, neighbors to be annoyed with their neighbors that have cooling. If that makes sense. It's a social consideration. Doesn't sound like it's a concern.
I think it's definitely an equity issue. I don't know that there's an easy answer though. It's
a real short refrigerant piping run from the top floor unit to the roof. That it's trickier when you have things on middle floors, and you sometimes end up wanting to put something out on a balcony or something. But for those top floor units, that's kind of a slam dunk there.
Yeah, I don't think it's even a cost or a logistic. It's more like if your project only has 4 heat pumps in the entire project just to meet code for this consideration, is that the best thing for the code and for the projects?
Yeah, what are alternatives?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have an alternative for that application.
Yeah. It's either a design issue in terms of the utilization of those corner spaces, or we need an alternative strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, always possible to kind of adjust your glazing areas, your size of those room, because this is on a room basis, that you could have a smaller living room in your corner unit just to meet this criteria. But, we haven't looked at all the different options, obviously. But,
one option to consider, David, is that you go talk to your friendly local passive house consultant and ask how they would do walls and windows and roofs, and it may be that especially better quality glazing, a triple glazed unit of some kind, better sealing. There could be other things you do besides switching to a heat pump that allow you to get down under that 600 watt level, following up on what those people from Lisbon were telling me, that you don't necessarily have to go heat pump if you do a good job with your passive design.
Well, it's not a cooling issue, it's a heating issue. So it's different considerations and how you approach the design.
Well, passive house people are always bragging that you should be able to heat your whole house with a hairdryer, right? So you ought to be able to heat a single living room with a 600-watt cove heater if you use some more. So anyway, it's something worth pursuing to look at higher quality envelope for that one situation instead of different HVAC.
Okay, we're nearing the point in time where Lauren is going to give me the hook. I'm wondering if there's any last comments. I will start off by thanking Duane and Sandra for being here. All of you for your persistent interest and desire to figure this out. And, you know, to Sharon's point, it's amazing how much a motivator code is for moving these things along. So I guess in some respects, for those of us who are believers that we can build ultra efficient buildings and meet the need for more affordable housing in an equitable way, that we appreciate the people who keep moving the code forward. Anybody have anything else they want to add to this conversation?
Could I just say that in response to what you just said, I'm so happy that the Exemplary Buildings Task Force exists, because you have already been mulling through these things for a few years now and have come up with solutions. And so this is not new, I think, for you. It's just going to have, I think, the rest of the industry catching up with where you've already gone.
Yes, and that is one of the debates, is why does market transformation fall on the affordable community? Why isn't the market rate side leading? And I think we can all wrestle with that in our own internal dissonance about what we believe related to equity and appropriateness in society for every citizen to benefit equally in the good that we can create. So hopefully this has stirred some more thoughts in that regard. And yes, we'll try to get Duane and Sandra's slides out to folks and accessible. And Lauren is reminding me that we have a member meeting on Friday, and I think she's short quorum by about 10 organizations. So there's likely that many on this call who could solve this quorum problem for Lauren, and would appreciate it if you would let her know who from your organization is going to be able to attend. With that, I'm going to wish you all a somewhat of a healthy rest of this week, and thank you all for participating today. Appreciate you. Take care now.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marty.